So in recent months, most games that I have played were kind of older games, games that came out in the beginning of the 21st century, and mostly not modern games with great graphics and huge open worlds. And while you have the obvious downsides when it comes to older games, like obviously the graphics or the technological disadvantages, playing more and more older games kind of showed a lot of weaknesses that we have in modern gaming and a lot of problems that we run into in modern games. So today's video will be a little bit different because I want to talk how older games showed me what is wrong with modern gaming. And now the first thing, and probably one of the most important aspects, is the problem with the graphics. And now at first glance, this may sound weird because we all like and love games that look good. And my favorite games are open world games, and I also love looking and watching at those fictional works of art because that's what they are in my opinion, and just looking at the distance and admiring the landscape. But when you think about it, that couldn't have been the case 20 years ago because obviously technology wasn't as far as it is today. So now you might ask, okay, well, what's the problem with it? I mean, it sounds great, great looking open world, because what older games had to point with was mainly the stories that they tell. When they would market a game, or when people would talk about that game with their friends and family, they couldn't say, look, the graphics look incredible. They mostly talked about the stories that were told in the games and the emotional connections. And developers nowadays have to put such a big focus on creating this huge and beautiful open world that I feel that they shifted their attention more from the story part of the game to the open world. And I think a great example of that is Assassin's Creed. Especially when you look at Assassin's Creed 1 to Valhalla, you really see that the first couple of games, they told incredible stories. I mean, if you've played Assassin's Creed 2, Brotherhood, or even Black Flag, the stories are unmatched. But when you think about Odyssey or Valhalla, you don't really remember a lot of iconic stories and people that you meet there. I mean, have you met a guy like Leonardo da Vinci from Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood in Valhalla or Odyssey? Of course not. The developers focus so much on creating this huge open world with so much in it that they kind of forget to tell great stories. And that's also a fact why a game like The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt to this day is so loved and played by a lot of people around the world, because the game just tells an incredible main story and additionally an incredible amount of great side quests paired with an incredible open world. And I feel like older games kind of only had the choice to focus on the story because they couldn't have focused on the graphics as much because the limitations were there. And nowadays a lot of games kind of shifted into this flashy open world, but the stories are kind of neglected. Another problem that I find in a lot of modern games is that there is a lack of emotional connection towards the protagonist and the game. And I always talk about that one of the most powerful things that games, movies, music, or everything in that genre can create is an emotional impact on the player, or on the listener, on the person that enjoys it. Because when you are connected to the protagonist and to the game, it is a way more powerful feeling, and you completely immerse yourself in the story because you want to know what's going to happen and you react to the things that happen to you. And again, a great example here is also Assassin's Creed. I mean, if you compare Ezio Auditore with Ivor, for example, I mean, it's not even a comparison. We met Ezio literally from the day he was born and lived through his whole life together. And most modern protagonists don't really spark that emotional connection that we feel with the game. Obviously there are even today exceptions, like in The Last of Us, for example, that in my opinion did that very well. But when you look at most modern games, there really isn't as much of an emotional connection that we players have with the game. And now another aspect, and a very obvious aspect, is obviously the focus on money. And listen, obviously developers back then also had to focus on money because that's how they survive, that's how they pay their employees, and that's how they grow as a company. But when you think about it, most big developers, they don't really need to tell great stories, they don't really need to create a great, incredible game, because they have already made a name for themselves. And when we are talking about Assassin's Creed, again, look at Ubisoft. You know, in the franchise, when the Far Cry or the Assassin's Creed franchises were starting out, it was a fairly small developer. Nowadays, almost everyone knows Ubisoft, and players buy their games even when they don't have a lot of great contents in it. And things like microtransactions, for example, would have been unheard of in those earlier games. And that's what gives me the perfect bridge to go over to the next point, which is, well, us, the gamers. We also take a big part in why developers are becoming more and more lazy, and games nowadays aren't near as close and as densely packed with great stories as they were back then. Because we simply buy every game there is, because when, let's say, Ubisoft creates a new game, you know, they don't really have to prove themselves anymore like they did back then. They had to tell great stories, they had to convince the players to buy those games. Now they have already made their name, and people buy the games only because Ubisoft made them. Or think about GTA. I mean, GTA 6 will most definitely be the most successful game in history without a doubt, but we still don't know if it's going to be trash. And I'm also part of the problem because you know, most games that I'm looking very forward to, I mean, when the next Witcher game will come out, I will pre-order it immediately. I won't even wait. So we also are part of the problem, because now those bigger developers don't have to prove themselves anymore. Moreover, I feel like gamers nowadays, I think developers know that we are getting dumber and dumber year by year. I mean, when you look at older games, I talked about that in my Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind review, they literally treat us like adults. You know, the path is not laid out there for you perfectly, you have to figure things out on yourself. And also under one of my last videos, some people commented that they just don't have as much time to play games. For example, Too Far Gone talks about that he has a job, kids, wife, and everything else that's going on in his life, and that he just has 6 to 8 hours of gaming time a week. First of all, thank you for your comment, it was very interesting to see that from your perspective. And I personally don't have a lot of time to play video games as well. You know, all in all, I probably play 10 hours a week of video games. But still, even those 10 to 15 hours a week, I would rather spend those hours in a great game that tells me great stories and that I can immerse myself in. I mean, you talked about the fact that you don't want to immerse yourself in the game to find the location because it is a waste of time in your opinion, and you just want to know where it is located on the map, fast travel there, you know, how we travel in modern games. Well, I have a completely different opinion. Because those hours that I do play, I want to experience as much of the game as I want to. And tell me, is gaming for you really as relaxing? Because when I play video games, that's also a big part of why I quit online games, is that I want to relax myself. You know, I want to wind down, just experience this great game and kind of forget everything that's going on all around the world and all my problems. Don't you think that that would make you feel better afterwards if you would play games like that and would make you more relaxed, more chilled in day-to-day life? And so the gaming audience definitely is also a part of the problem here. We also have to take responsibility. But the last point I want to talk about today is the lack of innovation. And I mean, when you think about it, most franchises, they have already built themselves. As I talked about earlier, a GTA, you know, you already know what you're getting. When a new Resident Evil game comes out, you already know what you're getting. But all in all, there isn't as much innovation as there used to. I mean, most great games that have come out in the last years are part of an already existing franchise. You know, then we have exceptions like Elden Ring, for example, that didn't have a game beforehand, and it was so rare to see a game like that as we all know, it became wildly successful. But most franchises, I mean, we're kind of getting the same thing over and over again. And obviously that's a good and bad thing, because those franchises built themselves on that formula. So we obviously also want to experience that again with a new setting, with better graphics, stuff like that. But still, a lot of developers, they kind of continue this cash cow. They give a game the same name, the same gameplay mechanics, and the only thing they change are the characters and the setting of the game. And that's quite sad to see, because when you think about it, in recent years, gaming didn't develop as much. But as I said, that is a positive and a negative point in one. All in all, I didn't make this video to shit on modern gaming and to tell you how bad modern games are, because we also have a lot of great games that are coming out every year. And even Assassin's Creed kind of improved themselves with Assassin's Creed Mirage, but those points are some aspects that I noticed quite easily while playing those older games. And I want to hear about your opinion on that topic, and if you think similarly to me, or if you have a completely different story. I mean, obviously age, background, and the games you play have a huge impact on your personal perception. So as I said, your own perspective is also a thing that interests me very much. Alright guys, that was it for me in today's video. I wish you all an amazing day. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.